Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Strife Hayes, and this is a complete beginner's guide to the collectible card game Magic: The Gathering. This guide is designed for brand new players and will cover all the basics you'll need to understand the game world and rules, build your first deck, and play your first few games. I won't be focusing on any specific deck or format, but will instead explain all the important rules you'll need to know and look at the most common situations you'll face. This guide is not a substitute for sitting down with a friendly, experienced player and letting them teach you the game. It's designed to help you grasp the basics and show you what kind of gameplay you'll need to expect. This guide will be extremely long and extremely detailed. Magic is a complicated game, so I'll be breaking all the complex rules down into super simple, easy to understand examples. If you know what you're looking for, you can skip to it using the time codes in the description below. If you're new to Magic, I suggest you grab a cup of tea and settle in. We have a lot to cover. History of the game. Magic: The Gathering was created by Richard Garfield in 1993. The first core set, commonly known as Alpha, contained 295 cards. Now, over 25 years later, there have been hundreds of expansion sets and standalone products, new formats invented, and several highly successful video game adaptations. The Magic professional circuit draws thousands of players and hundreds of thousands of viewers. And as of the time of this guide, Magic has over 17,000 unique cards, with over 20 billion physical cards printed. This number will only ever go up. Before we discuss the game itself, let's take a quick look at the lore and history of the in-game universe. Magic: The Gathering is a fantasy battle between players who take on the roles of planeswalkers, a powerful being able to hop between the many planes of reality that exist within the multiverse. As you travel through this fantastical journey, you'll visit places, meet creatures, and discover spells. All the things you experience eventually become your deck of cards. Your deck is a collection of the places you've been and things you've experienced brought together to fight another player. At least, that's the in-game lore. Magic and the multiverse of planes are all connected by 5 main colours of Magic. Each colour is focused on a different gameplay style. White is about life and light, healing players or protecting your creatures on the board. White Magic has powerful angelic creatures or defensive spells, often becoming more powerful when you have more life. White mana is produced by planes. Blue is about control, deciding and dictating the pace and flow of the battle. Blue Magic is all about countering the spells your opponents casts, preventing them from doing things, or drawing more cards for yourself, so you always have answers to any problem. Blue mana is produced by islands. Black is about death and loss of life, and not always the opponents. Black cards can kill creatures or harm your enemies, or harm you for beneficial effects. Black Magic sees your life as a resource to be spent to achieve your end goal. Black mana is produced by swamps. Red is anger and damage. Red creatures are often the most aggressive, and red spells are about doing as much damage as fast as possible. Red doesn't care too much about being subtle or crafty. It's all about attacking. Red mana is produced by mountains. Green is focused on growth and regeneration, accelerating your land and growing huge creatures. Green Magic often helps you race ahead of your opponent by generating more mana or playing lots of creatures very quickly. Green often doesn't have the damage of red or the control of blue, but you'll flood the battle with powerful creatures much quicker. Green mana is produced by forests. There is also colourless mana, devoid of any of the traits of the main 5 colours. Colourless is needed by the ancient and plane-destroying Eldrazi. Colourless mana is produced by wastes. These are very general statements and won't apply to every card in that colour, but they'll help you get a general feel for how that colour plays. Now we've looked at a brief history of Magic and the 5 colours, let's look at the components of a Magic card. Components of a card. The border colour, edging, and superficial design of a Magic card has changed over the years, but the core layout and information placing has remained consistent. Here's what each card will have. Name. The card names will be shown in the top left. If multiple versions of a card exist, for example, a lightning bolt printed in 1993 and a lightning bolt printed in 2019, they are still both exactly the same card as far as the game is concerned. Mana cost. The mana cost of all cards is shown in the top right. We'll discuss how to produce mana later, but here's how the cost works. Some cards will have a number in a small grey circle. This is called generic mana. You can spend mana of any colour to pay this generic cost. You may also then see any number of coloured mana symbols to the right of the generic cost. These symbols can only be paid using mana of this colour. Let's take Shivan Dragon as an example. Shivan Dragon's total mana cost is 6. 4 of this is a generic cost and can be paid with any colour, and 2 is red and can only be paid using red mana. If we look at Sliver Queen, we'll see her total mana cost is 5, but you must pay this using one of each type of mana. The total mana cost of a card, when you add the generic and colour specified mana together, is known as the converted mana cost, or CMC. Usually the better a card is, the higher the CMC will be. Sometimes a card will have an X in the mana cost. This means you're able to pay whatever you want for X. Usually the more you pay, the better a spell will be. Fireball has a cost of X and 1 red, meaning you must spend 1 red mana and then any amount you like for X. You'll do X damage to your opponent, so spend more mana and do more damage. For the sake of converted mana cost, X is always counted as 0. So Fireball, despite being a potentially very strong card, has a converted mana cost of 1 because of the 1 red in its mana cost. Some cards, such as lands, will not have a mana cost. Artwork. Magic has some stunning artwork and has explored a huge variation of artistic styles, from the early fantasy of the early sets all the way through to Egypt, pirates, feudal Japan, futuristic cities, zombies, vampires, or famous cards redone in full art versions. The type line will tell you what type of spell this card is. The most common types you'll find are land, creature, instant, sorcery, enchantment, saga, and planeswalkers. I'll explain more about each one of these later on. Some cards may have additional information before or after their type. Let's take this creature, Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni, as an example. Information on the type line is given in this order: supertype, type, subtype 1, subtype 2. The supertype in this instance is legendary. The type is creature. The creature is then categorized into 2 further subtypes: rat and ninja. This information is used whenever a spell specifically mentions a certain super or subtype. Some spells may say, kill target legendary creature. If this happens because Ink Eyes is indeed legendary, it could be targeted. If a spell says, target ninja gains flying, it could again target Ink Eyes, because the type line tells us this, specifically, is a ninja. Expansion symbol. On the right-hand side of the type line, you'll see the expansion symbol for that card. The shape of this symbol will let you know which expansion or supplemental set this card came from, and the colour will tell you the card's rarity. Magic cards have 4 different rarity levels. Common. Cards will have a black and white symbol. Uncommon. The symbol will be silver. Rare cards will be gold, and mythic rare will be red. If the card is from an additional special collector's set, such as a From the Vault edition, the expansion symbol will let you know. Text box. Everything a card does is listed in the text box. Often when you ask, what does this card do, you'll be told to read the card. And while this is a rather direct and rude answer, Magic cards really do tell you everything you need to know. The text box of a card will include any specific powerful abilities this card has, any passive, activated or triggered abilities, or any keywords which relate to this card. I'll explain all these later on in this guide. Any text in brackets is reminder text, usually placed after a keyword or an ability, simply to remind you what it does. Any italic text on the bottom of the card is known as flavor text. It doesn't add any effect in the game, but it does tell you more about the world and the history of the lore of magic. Power and toughness. If the card is a creature, the bottom right will show two numbers. The first is its power, how much damage it will do to a creature or player if it hits them. The second is its toughness, how much damage this creature is able to take in a single turn before it dies. I'll explain how damage and blocking work in the combat section of this guide. Collector number and artist. In the very bottom left, you'll see the collector number of this card and how many cards are in this specific set. Under that, you'll see a 3-letter code which relates to the specific set, and then the artist's name. Spells. You may hear me use the term spell to describe a magic card. A spell is any card that is not a land. So creatures, sorceries, instants, enchantments, planeswalkers, and sagas, they're all spells. But lands are not spells. Formats. Magic the Gathering is a complex game, so to keep the game fair, it's been divided down into certain formats. Each format has slightly different rules about which cards can and cannot be played. If you're a brand new player with a set of cards, you'll most likely be playing what we call kitchen table magic. Just use whatever you've got, play with your friends, and have fun. All formats do contain some general rules. These are: your deck must be 60 cards or more. It's usually not advised to go above 60, but you can if you want to. You may only play up to 4 copies of a single card, excluding basic lands. This means you may run 1, 2, 3, or 4 copies of any named card. Having 4 copies of a card is referred to as a playset, because you'll never need more than 4. This rule doesn't apply to basic lands, which are plains, islands, swamps, mountains, and forests. You may play as many of these as you like in any deck. Each player begins at 20 life points. The aim of the game is to win, and the most common method of doing this is to reduce your opponent down to 0, although there are many alternative win conditions. We'll discuss these later. As you get more into organised play, you'll play within a certain format. Here's a brief rundown of the most commonly played formats. Standard. The standard Magic format allows you to play cards from the latest 3 or 4 expansion blocks. Only cards released in the latest several expansions are allowed. This is known as a rotating format, as when a new expansion is released, the older expansion is no longer allowed. To find out which expansions are currently allowed, simply Google Magic the Gathering Standard. If a card is currently printed in a standard legal expansion, you may use any printing of that card. It does not have to be the exact artwork from the new set. For example, if Lightning Bolt was reprinted in a new expansion and became legal to play in Standard, I could use any version of the card called Lightning Bolt that I own. Modern. The Modern format allows all cards printed in all expansions from 8th edition and onwards. 8th edition was printed in 2003, so any card printed in any set released since 2003 can be played in Modern, unless it's specifically on the ban list. Modern is a non-rotating format. Once you own a Modern deck, it won't ever rotate out like Standard does. Legacy and Vintage are 2 older formats allowing cards from most of Magic's history, including the immensely powerful and extremely expensive Power 9 or the original Dual Lands. If you're new to Magic, you won't be playing this format. Draft. Draft is one of the more random and fun formats. You usually sit with a group of people, purchase 3 booster packs each, then open a single booster pack, take one card, and pass the remainder of your pack to the next person. After opening and passing all 3 packs, you will have a selection of cards in front of you that you've chosen. You'll then build a deck from those cards and play against everyone else. Each local gaming store may booster draft in different ways, so ask how your local shop does it. Booster drafting is a great way to meet local players and slowly build up a collection, while learning all the mechanics and interactions of the latest cards. Commander. Commander is a multiplayer format where you pick a legendary creature to be your commander, then build a 100 card deck. You can only have one of each named card, and each card can only contain the mana colours that your commander also has. So if your commander is a legendary creature with red, green and black in their mana cost, you can only add red, green or black cards into your commander deck. Each player starts with 40 life instead of the usual 20. Commander is usually played by a large group of players and can be very fun and very time consuming. The limit of one of each card means you can focus more on having fun than building a competitive edge. That's a few of the more popular formats. You won't need to master them all, just be aware that Magic is much more than just kitchen table battles. For the purpose of this guide, we're going to use the standard or modern format. Recent expansions, 60 card minimum, 4 of a card limit, and 20 life. Order of a game. For this guide, I'm going to explain the phases and parts of a turn in detail, and give examples to show exactly how they work. It may sound complex as I'm explaining it, but believe me when I say it will become extremely simple and easy within 2 or 3 games. Before the game starts, you'll shuffle your deck. Your deck is also referred to as your library, and I'll use both words in this guide. Present the shuffled deck or library to your opponents for them to shuffle it. This isn't essential at kitchen table level, but it's needed at higher levels of competitive play, so you know your opponent hasn't stacked their deck. Once both decks are shuffled and handed back, you'll place your deck face down, then decide on who will go first, usually done by rolling a dice. Once you know who's going first, each player will draw 7 cards. If you're happy with your opening hand of 7, you'll keep your hand. If you're unhappy with your opening hand, you can shuffle them back into your deck, shuffle the deck again, and draw 7 again. This is known as a mulligan. However, each time you do this, you will then have to choose one more card from your hand and put it on the bottom of your deck. This means if you mulligan twice, you'll then have to choose 2 of the 7 cards you've drawn and place them on the bottom of your library before the game begins. Ideally, you don't want to mulligan too much. Once you're both happy with your opening hands, the game starts. Each turn in Magic must follow several phases. In order, these phases are untap, upkeep, draw, pre-combat main phase, combat, which is broken down into declare attackers, declare blockers, and damage, post-combat main phase, end step, and cleanup. When the game first starts, for the very first turn of the game only, you will skip the untap, upkeep, and draw step. This is to reduce the first turn advantage by preventing the player going first from drawing a card on their very first turn. Let's imagine the game has been going a while and go through these steps in order. 1. Untap. Tapping a card means turning it sideways. There are many reasons you'd tap a card. Lands can be tapped to generate mana. Creatures tap when they attack. Usually, a card can only be tapped once a turn, and when it's tapped, it cannot be used again until it untaps, which happens here. During the untap step, turn all of your tapped cards back straight up. 2. Upkeep. Sometimes there will be cards on the field, such as creatures or enchantments, that say on them, during your upkeep, something happens. This is that time. If I happen to have a Fountain of Renewal on the battlefield, which says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life, this is when I'd gain it. Once all upkeep triggers have been followed, you move on to the next step. Step 3. Draw. Once you've untapped and followed any upkeep triggers, you can now draw a single card from the top of your library into your hand. Pre-combat main phase. After untap, upkeep, draw comes the pre-combat main phase. This is an important tactical time. You get 2 main phases in a turn: pre-combat, before attacking, and post-combat, after attacking. Each main phase follows the same rules. During either of the main phases, you can play a land. This means you can put 1 land card from your hand onto the battlefield. You can only play 1 land per turn. If you play a land during your pre-combat main phase, you can't play another in your post-combat main phase. Basic lands always enter the battlefield untapped, meaning you'll set them straight up. Lands are usually played closest to yourself. Play creatures. To win Magic, you want a battlefield full of powerful creatures. Once cast, creatures will remain on the battlefield until an effect destroys them, either combat or spell damage. Creatures are usually placed onto the battlefield above lands, closer to your opponent. To get a creature from your hand onto the battlefield, you simply need to pay its mana cost. The mana cost will be listed in the top right. To generate mana, you tap land. Tapping a land card simply means turning it sideways. Tapping land doesn't cause it to die or be destroyed. When you tap a land card on the battlefield, it will give you 1 mana of that colour. This mana exists in a place known as your mana pool, and you then spend mana from your mana pool to pay the casting cost of spells. For example, let's say I have 2 mountains on the battlefield, and in my hand I have Karizev, Skyship Raider, Shivan Dragon, Blightsteel Colossus, and Gravecrawler. I only have the ability to tap 2 lands and produce 2 mana. So Shivan Dragon and Blightsteel Colossus are both impossible for me to cast right now. Their mana cost is too expensive. Gravecrawler, despite only needing 1, needs black mana, and I only have mountains, so I can only produce red, so I can't cast that either. But Karizev, I can cast. She has a cost of 1 generic, which I can pay with any colour, in this case a single red, and 1 red specific, which I am able to pay with the other mountain. I tap both my mountains, generating 2 red mana, then immediately spend it to put Karizev onto the battlefield. That mana cannot be spent on anything else this turn. It's already been used to cast Karizev. Mana in my mana pool, the stuff created by tapping lands, remains there until I choose to go to the next phase of my turn. When you move from one phase to the next, any mana in your mana pool simply disappears. It's wasted. You can play as many creatures per turn as you like, as long as you can pay the mana cost for each individual one. Play sorceries and instants. Sorceries and instants are single-time spells, powerful effects you pay for, cast, resolve, then they go to your graveyard. Sorceries can only be cast during your pre-combat or post-combat main phase while the stack is empty and you have priority. Instants can be cast whenever you have priority. We'll look at the specifics of priority and the stack later. For now, let's look at a sorcery. Cultivate is a green sorcery with a converted mana cost of 3, 2 generic and 1 green. Being a sorcery, it can only be cast on my pre- or post-combat main phase. If I have the mana to play it, I can cast it. Then I'll do what the spell says. In this case, search my library for 2 basic lands, reveal them, and put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into my hand, then shuffle my library. Once any sorcery or instant spell has been cast, it is placed into the graveyard. A graveyard is a collection of already cast instant or sorcery cards, dead creatures or planeswalkers, or destroyed artifacts or enchantments. All graveyards are face up, and any player can see what is in any other player's graveyard at any time. Play enchantments, artifacts, sagas, or planeswalkers. While on my first or second main phase, you can also cast enchantments, artifacts, sagas, or planeswalker spells. These are usually powerful static spells that remain on the battlefield and provide an advantage, or a constant reusable ability. Most artifacts or enchantments don't have a power or toughness like creatures, because they can't attack or defend. They just remain on the board and benefit you. Some creatures are also artifacts, as shown in their type line. Sagas and planeswalkers are complex card types and are explained later in this guide. Once I feel I've done all I can do on my pre-combat main phase, I've played my land for the turn or cast my creatures or sorcery spells, I can move to the combat phase. Combat. Combat in Magic the Gathering is mainly about killing your opponent. You'll use your creatures to damage their life total until it reaches 0. Combat is broken down into several smaller steps. 1. Declare attackers. If it's your go and you've moved to combat, you will now declare every creature you wish to attack with. A creature cannot attack the same turn it enters the battlefield. It's said to have summoning sickness. It must survive 1 upkeep before it can attack. However, the keyword haste removes this limit. If a creature has haste, it can attack the same turn it enters. Keywords are discussed later in this guide. To declare a creature as an attacker, simply tap it, which is turning it sideways. If that creature is already tapped, it cannot be declared as an attacker. You must declare every creature you want to attack with. Once you've finalized your decision, you can't go back and change it. You can attack with as many or as few creatures as you like, but once you've declared your attacks, it's final. In Magic, you do not attack your opponent's creatures. You attack the opponent themselves. When declaring an attack, you cannot say, I attack your creature with my creature. You simply say, I attack you. Let's use an in-game example. I control 2 creatures with 2 power and 2 toughness. We refer to these as 2/2 creatures. My opponent controls 2 creatures with 1 power and 1 toughness, referred to as 1/1 creatures. I declare both my creatures as attackers. Once all the attacks have been declared, it moves to the next step. 2. Declare blockers. Now it's the opponent's time to make decisions. They have creatures attacking them. They can either do nothing and take the damage, or block using their own creatures. For a creature to be declared as a blocker, it must be untapped. A tapped creature cannot block. All blockers must be declared at the same time. You may block with as many or as few creatures as you want, and you may block a single attacker with multiple blockers. For this example, let's say I block each 2/2 with a 1/1. Once blocks have all been declared, we move on to the next step. Step 3. Damage. Attacks have been declared, blocks have been declared, damage now happens. All damage happens at exactly the same time, and even though you will likely resolve each creature step by step, remember that one individual creature will not attack or die first. All calculations are solved instantaneously. If a creature is not blocked, it will hit the defending player. That player will lose life equal to the unblocked creature's power. Remember, power was the first number. If a creature with 5 power attacks and is not blocked, it will reduce the opponent's life by 5. If a creature is blocked, then the attacking creature will hit the blocker, and the blocker will also hit the attacking creature back at the same time. Each creature deals damage to the other. The damage dealt is equal to that creature's power. If the damage dealt to it is greater than that creature's toughness, it will die and go to the graveyard. This sounds complex, but it's really very simple. In the above example, the blocks looked like this, so the damage would be this. The first 2/2 creature does 2 damage to the blocking 1/1. The blocker only has 1 toughness, so will now die. But it also hit back at exactly the same time. It hit its power, in this case 1, against my attacker. However, my attacker has 2 toughness, so will not die. This happens for both blocks. The result of this blocking combination is the opponent will take no damage because both attacks have successfully been blocked. However, both blockers will die and both attacking creatures will remain alive. When a creature blocks, it will absorb all incoming damage from the attacker. Even if that blocker only has 1 toughness and the attacker has 10 power, the blocker will protect me from all damage. Throwing a smaller creature in front of a much larger creature, simply to shield yourself from taking damage, is known as chump blocking. You will lose the creature, but you'll keep your health. This rule is broken if a creature has the keyword trample. Creatures with trample will assign as much of their power as they need to kill the blocker, equal to its toughness. Then any remaining power will be trampled through onto the defending player's life total. But what if we return to the previous example and we block differently? The attack declares 2 2/2 bears, and we have 2 1/1 untapped creatures. During the declare blockers step this time, we assign both of our 1/1s to block a single attacker. The damage step now happens. There's an unblocked bear, so 2 damage is going through to go onto the player no matter what, but the other attacker has been double blocked. If the attacking creature is blocked by more than 1 blocker, the attacking creature's controller can choose how to divide the attacking damage. You could choose to do 2 damage to a single enemy or 1 damage to both of them. In this scenario, it's best to split the damage and do 1 damage to both, as this will kill both of the blockers. But the blockers hit back 1 each against the bear. The bear now has 2 damage marked on it, which is enough to kill it. Once the damage step is resolved this time, the 2 blockers have died, the blocked bear has died as well, and the defending player has taken 2 damage. Once all damage has been resolved, the turn continues into the post-combat main phase. Post-combat main phase. After combat, there's another main phase. You can do anything you would normally do in a main phase: play lands, cast creatures, sorceries, enchantments, artifacts, sagas, or planeswalkers. Remember, you can only play a total of 1 land per turn, so if you played 1 pre-combat, you can't play another post-combat. Once you're happy you've done everything you want to, you declare the end of your turn. End phase. When you declare the end of your turn, the turn doesn't actually end instantly. There are a few things that happen behind the scenes. Any excess mana is removed from your mana pool, and all damage marked on any creatures wears off. A creature does not carry damage over from turn to turn, meaning if a creature has 4 toughness, you can't do 2 damage on one turn and then 2 damage on the next and add it together for a total of 4. You must do all the damage needed to kill a creature in a single turn. Your opponent now has the choice to begin their turn or not. There are several advanced interactions that actually involve doing something on your opponent's end step before your turn begins. But for now, let's just say whenever you declare the end of your turn, your opponent begins theirs. That's a whole turn. Your opponent will then begin theirs following the same order: untap, upkeep, draw, pre-combat main, combat, post-combat main, end. Remember, if your opponent goes to combat and declares attackers, you can only declare untapped creatures to be blockers. So attacking may seem good at the time on your turn, but attacking requires your creatures to tap, meaning creatures that attacked won't be able to block your opponent next turn. During that section, I mentioned the stack and priority. This is one of the most complex parts of Magic the Gathering. It's something advanced players still get wrong. And for beginner basic games, it won't come up as an issue much, but it's an important game mechanic, so I'm going to explain it slowly, in detail, with examples. The stack and priority. Magic the Gathering is a game about casting spells. You tap your land for mana and use that mana to cast spells. With the exception of instants, you can only cast spells when it's your turn. The stack is empty, and you have priority. When you cast any spell, creature, planeswalker, sorcery, or any other, it's placed onto what we call the stack. The stack is a list of queued up spells that have been cast but not yet resolved. That means they're ready to happen but haven't happened yet. The stack also uses or lists abilities or other things that need to happen. Think of it as an invisible tower above the game with a list of spells that need to happen on it. Priority is what a player has when they are able to place something onto or interact with the stack, and is passed between each player whenever a phase moves to the next phase, or a spell or ability is placed onto the stack. The stack resolves in reverse order, known as first in, last out, shortened to philo. Sounds complex, really isn't. Here's an example. It's my go, and it's my pre-combat main phase. I have priority because it's currently my active turn and the stack is empty. There's no spell on it right now. My opponent has a creature on the field, and I want to kill it. So I tap my land for 1 red mana and cast Lightning Bolt, targeting the creature. Lightning Bolt is now on the stack. It's waiting to happen. Because something has been added to the stack, priority now passes to my opponent. Even though it's my turn, they gain priority for a moment. While you have priority, you can cast an instant speed spell. You'll know it's instant because it will say instant on the type line. This will place your spell on the stack above whatever is currently there. This is often known as responding. If a player casts a spell or activates an ability and another player says, in response, it means they're about to add something onto the stack that will happen first. With my opponent having priority, they tap 3 islands and cast Cancel. Cancel is an instant speed spell and says counter target spell. Cancel is now on the stack above my Lightning Bolt. Cancel is the latest thing to be added, so it will happen first. This is the resolves in reverse order mechanic. With a new spell added, priority passes back to me. I could, if I want, choose to cast an instant spell and place it above Cancel, but I don't have any mana available, so I choose to do nothing and pass priority back. If priority has been passed between both players and they both do nothing, the stack will begin to resolve. Things added last happen first. Cancel resolves. This means it is cast successfully, and that spell allows the casting player to counter any target spell. They target my Lightning Bolt. Cancel is placed into my opponent's graveyard as it has been cast, and Lightning Bolt gets countered before it actually resolves, which removes it from the stack and places it into my graveyard. Think of it as they've made my spell fizzle before it actually happens. The stack now continues to resolve. It's looking for my Lightning Bolt, but as it's been countered, it's no longer there. With the stack now empty, priority returns to the active player, in this case me because it's my turn, and the game continues. The stack can have an unlimited number of things or actions on it that need to happen, and will always resolve in reverse order. After playing a few games, you'll begin to grasp how it works. Priority is a state each player has during their active turn, and must pass to their opponent whenever they move from phase to phase, place anything on the stack, or activate an ability. Creature, sorcery, enchantment, planeswalker, saga, and artifact spells can only be cast when it's your turn, there's nothing on the stack, and you have priority. Instant spells, or activated abilities, can be cast and used any time you have priority, even if it's not your turn. Now we've looked at the basic breakdown of a magic card, how the turn works, and the order of the phases, how to cast spells using the stack and respond to spells using priority. Let's look at each individual card type and discuss what they actually do. Card type breakdown. Land. Land cards are used to generate mana. You can play 1 land per turn, moving it from your hand onto the battlefield. Once on the battlefield, the land can be tapped to produce 1 mana of its colour. A land is not a spell, and a land card often has a converted mana cost of 0, as it doesn't have a casting cost. Land is either basic or non-basic. Basic land says basic as the supertype on the type line. The 5 main lands, plains, islands, swamps, mountains, and forests are all basic lands, and enter the battlefield untapped, meaning they can be tapped to generate mana of that colour the same turn they enter. Lands can also be non-basic. A non-basic land will often have a more complex interaction. Let's look at a few examples. Foul Orchard, a non-basic land card. This card lets us know that it always enters the battlefield tapped, so it cannot be tapped to generate mana on the same turn it enters. However, it also shows us its ability. Tap, which is that little circle with the right flicked arrow is the tap symbol, to add either black or green to your mana pool. The downside of Foul Orchard is you can't use it on the turn it enters. The upside is you can then choose which colour mana you want to produce every turn. Another non-basic land you'll see often, Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds has the following text. Tap, sacrifice Evolving Wilds. To sacrifice a card, you must move it from the battlefield to the graveyard. If you do this, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Evolving Wilds can't actually tap to produce any mana itself. It doesn't have that ability. Instead, it can go and find you any basic land. Useful if you have lots of lands and need to go and find a specific colour. Creature. Creatures will be your primary source of damage and board dominance. When you cast a creature, you pay the mana cost, place it onto the stack, pass priority to your opponent and wait to see if they have any response, and if they don't, the stack resolves and your creature enters the battlefield. Creatures may sometimes have enter the battlefield effects, certain things that happen when this creature enters. We'll look at a few of those later on. Sorcery. A sorcery is a single-time spell that can only be cast when it's your pre-combat or post-combat main phase, you have priority, and the stack is empty. This means they're not as versatile as other spells because they're limited to your turn, but they're often more powerful to make up for this. When a sorcery either resolves successfully or is countered, it goes to the graveyard. Instant. An instant spell is like a sorcery, except you can cast it whenever you have priority, even if it's not your turn or the stack is already being used. This allows you to respond to things using instants. Enchantment. An enchantment is a constant effect that will remain on the battlefield. Some enchantments simply go onto the battlefield in general. Here's an example using Shaper's Sanctuary. It costs a single green mana and will give you the constant passive effect of whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. Some enchantments must target and be cast onto a creature already on the battlefield. If that's the case, the enchantment will say Aura on the type line, and the text box will tell you to enchant creature. Here's an example of an aura using Battle Mastery. It costs 2 generic and 1 white mana, and will give the enchanted creature Double Strike. Double Strike is a keyword, and will be explained in the keywords section of this guide. Artifact. An artifact is similar to an enchantment. Artifacts stay on the battlefield and provide additional effects. Here's an example of an artifact using Aether Spellbomb. It costs 1 generic mana to play, and then when it's on the battlefield, it has 2 different activated abilities. The first requires you to pay 1 blue mana and sacrifice Aether Spellbomb to return a target creature to its owner's hand. The second requires you to pay 1 generic mana of any colour and sacrifice it to draw a card. These are both activated abilities, which are explained later in this guide. Sometimes creatures will also be artifacts, shown here with the example of Platinum Empyrean. Often, artifacts will only have generic mana as a casting cost, and will not be associated with a certain colour. Artifact creatures can be affected and targeted by any spells or abilities that target creatures or artifacts. Planeswalker. You, within the story of Magic, are a planeswalker, a powerful being with the ability to move between realities, but within the rules of the game, you're referred to as a player. When we talk about planeswalker cards, we're talking about these. A planeswalker is a powerful card type. Let's break them down. A planeswalker will have a casting cost and be played just like any other spell. If it resolves and manages to enter the battlefield, it will enter with a certain number of loyalty counters, shown by the number in the bottom right. During your turn, you may activate one of your planeswalker's abilities for each planeswalker you have. You may only activate them any time you could play a sorcery spell, so during your pre- or post-combat main phase with an empty stack when you have priority. You may only activate each planeswalker once per turn. Planeswalker cards look a little different. They'll often have several abilities to choose from. Each ability will have either a plus or minus amount on the left. This is how many loyalty counters you have to add or remove to make the ability happen. Abilities that add loyalty are usually weaker, while abilities that remove loyalty are often very powerful. Let's take the red planeswalker, Chandra the Firebrand, as an example. She has a converted mana cost of 4, 3 generic and 1 red, and will enter the battlefield with 3 loyalty counters. During your turn, if you choose to activate her +1 ability, she'll deal 1 damage to any target creature or player, and you put 1 loyalty counter on her. Her -2, removing 2 counters, allows you to copy your next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn, choosing new targets for the copy if you want. And her -6 deals 6 damage to each of up to 6 target creatures or players. You can have as many planeswalkers on the field as you like, but you can only have one of each specific name. This is part of the legendary rule. This means you can control Chandra the Firebrand and Chandra Ablaze at the same time, because the cards have different names, despite both being Chandra. But you cannot have 2 copies of Chandra the Firebrand at the same time. Planeswalkers are not creatures and cannot be declared as attackers or blockers. During your declare attackers step of the combat phase, if your opponent has a planeswalker, you must declare which creatures are attacking the opponent directly and which creatures are attacking any planeswalkers they control. Damage done to planeswalkers removes their loyalty counters, 1 counter for each 1 point of damage. If a planeswalker is ever reduced to 0 loyalty counters, either through activating an ability which kills them or damage removing loyalty counters, they are sent to the graveyard. Sagas. A saga is a newer card type and looks very different. Simply put, a saga is a short, repeatable event that happens as it enters the battlefield and whenever a lore counter is placed on it. Let's work through an example using History of Benalia. History of Benalia has a converted mana cost of 3, 1 generic and 2 white. When it enters the battlefield, you will place a lore counter on it and then perform the action related to how many lore counters it has, shown on the left. In this case, you will create a 2/2 white knight creature token with the keyword Vigilance. As the remainder text at the top says, after your draw step, add a lore counter, then perform the action related to that number of counters. 2 counters, in this case, is exactly the same as 1. At 3 lore counters, knight creatures you control will receive +2/+1, meaning a power increase of 2 and a toughness increase of 1 until the end of the turn. This saga is designed to work with itself. Knight is a subtype of creature and is exactly the same as the tokens you've just made. Once a saga reaches over the maximum lore counters, it is sacrificed and placed into the graveyard. Tokens. That saga previously produced tokens, so let's look at those. A token is often a creature. A token creature can only exist on the battlefield. Any action that causes that token to change zones, such as being returned to your hand, placed in the graveyard, removed from the battlefield in any way or sent back to the library, will destroy the token. Tokens can only exist on the battlefield and nowhere else. Abilities. Passive, triggered, and activated. You may have heard the phrase ability used. An ability is something a card has or can do, and is broadly broken down into three main styles: passive, triggered, or activated. Let's take a look at all of them. A passive ability is something a card has that will remain constant as long as the card remains on the battlefield. Here's Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. She's a legendary human soldier creature with a converted mana cost of 2, 1 generic and 1 white. She has the keyword First Strike and then a passive ability which reads, non-creature spells cost 1 generic mana more to cast. If she is on the field, all non-creature spells become 1 generic mana more expensive. This can slow down an enemy's plan significantly. This is a passive ability. It does not require anything to be active, it simply always is active as long as Thalia is on the field. The next is a triggered ability. This can be identified by looking for the words when, whenever, or at on the card. It's an ability that requires something to happen before it will do whatever it does. That event that happens is known as the trigger. Here's an example using the artifact Worm's Tooth. It's a 2 mana artifact costing 2 generic and has the triggered ability, whenever a player casts a green spell, you may gain 1 life. The ability has the trigger of whenever a player casts a green spell and the reward ability of you gain 1 life. Some creatures, like this Blade Splicer here, will have Enter the Battlefield abilities. These cause certain things to happen whenever the creature resolves from the stack and enters the battlefield. All Enter the Battlefield abilities are triggered abilities. The final type of ability is an activated ability. This is an ability which you have control over and will have a cost and an effect. It's easy to spot an activated ability by looking for the colon. If a card has a colon, it's broken down into the cost before and the payoff after. Here's an example using Soul Ring. Soul Ring is an artifact, CMC 1 generic, and has 1 activated ability. The cost is tap this card, and the reward is add 2 generic mana to your mana pool. Activated abilities use the stack. When you activate one, it will be placed onto the stack, and you'll then have to pass priority to your opponent, and they will have a chance to respond. Activating abilities can also be activated at instant speed, meaning you can activate an ability of a creature or artifact in response to something being placed onto the stack. That's a basic rundown of the 3 types of ability. Next, let's look at some keywords. Keywords. Sometimes an effect or interaction will become so famous and so well known in Magic that the card won't fully explain what it does, it will simply have a keyword. Experienced players will immediately know what it does, but newer players may be confused. So here's a breakdown of some common keywords. Haste. Remember how a creature cannot attack or tap the same turn it enters the battlefield because of something we call summoning sickness? Well, haste removes that. A creature with haste can attack and tap the same turn it enters the field. Flying. A flying creature can fly over the heads of other creatures. A flying creature can only be blocked by other creatures that have flying or by a creature with the keyword reach. Reach. This creature is not flying, but it is able to block creatures that do have flying. Lifelink. Any damage this creature does to either another creature, a player, or a planeswalker is then given back to you as life points. If a creature with lifelink hits the enemy for 3 damage, you'll gain 3 life. Death Touch. If this creature deals damage to another creature by blocking it or being blocked by it, it will destroy that other creature. It doesn't matter how tough the other creature is, it will die. First Strike. A creature with first strike gains an advantage in combat. Remember how when calculating damage, all calculations happen at exactly the same time. Both creatures hit each other simultaneously in a blocked situation. Well, first strike changes that. First strike allows the creature with first strike to hit first. And if that hit would be enough to kill the other creature, that creature is killed without a chance to respond. First strike damage happens first, any changes to combat are then checked, then the regular strike damage happens. Double strike. A creature with double strike will hit twice, dealing both first strike and regular strike damage. Keywords can be combined, and often a creature can have multiple keywords on it. Here's an example using the brilliant Vampire Nighthawk. Costing 1 generic and 2 black, it's a creature, subtype Vampire Shaman, power 2, toughness 3, but has all the keywords flying, death touch, and lifelink. There are many more keywords. I'll leave a link in the description below to a list of all the keywords, and you can look them up as you discover each of them in a game. Protection. Protection is a more complex keyword, and a lot of players get it wrong, so I want to go over it quickly. Whenever the word protection is used, we use the acronym DEBT, D-E-B-T. A creature with protection from something cannot be damaged, enchanted, blocked, or targeted by anything of that specific thing. So here's an example using the creature Mirren Crusader. It has protection from green and black, meaning if it blocks a green or black creature, it will receive no damage in combat. It cannot be enchanted by a black or green enchantment. If it is declared an attacker, it cannot be blocked by any creature with a black or green mana symbol in its mana cost, and it cannot be the target of any spell with a black or green mana symbol in its casting cost. To see the potential crazy power of this keyword, see the creature Progenitus, which has protection from everything. Deck building tips. Before you play the game, you need to build your deck to gather your creatures and spells together. Let's talk about the basics of simple deck building. While you can have 5 colours of magic to choose from, it's not a great idea to play all 5 in a single deck. You'll stretch your mana base too thin. You won't have the lands to produce the colour of mana you need to cast your spells reliably. So for now, let's stick to 2 colours. A basic deck should have around 40% mana producing cards. This means in a 60 card deck, around 24 of these should be lands or creatures that can tap to produce mana. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but instead a general beginner's guideline. With 24 land, that leaves room for 36 spells. Most of these spells should be creatures, as creatures will remain on the battlefield and be your main source of damage and blocking. There are decks that run either very few or no creatures at all, but as a beginner it's advisable to run a lot of creatures. Now you'll need to consider your mana curve. The mana curve is the rate at which converted mana costs of your spells increases, and it should look something like this. You have several 1-cost spells, meaning their converted mana cost is 1 and you can cast them on turn 1. Several converted mana cost 2 spells, meaning you can now do something on turn 2. Then fewer spells that cost 3, 4 or 5, and then even fewer that cost 6 or more. Shivan Dragon is a great card, but if you put 4 of them into your deck, the maximum you're allowed, and you draw all 4 of them early in the game, you won't be able to cast them until turn 6, which will limit what you can do on turns 1 to 5. The best decks have things they plan on doing turn 1, 2, and 3, and then multiple possibilities after turn 4. Alternative win conditions. Reducing your opponent's life from 20 to 0 is the main way to win, but it's not the only way. If your opponent goes to draw a card from their library and they have no cards to draw, then you win. This is known as milling them, based on the old card Millstone, which makes your opponent put cards straight from their library into their graveyard. If an opponent receives 10 poison counters, gained from taking damage from creatures with the infect keyword, they will die. Door to Nothingness is an artifact costing 5 generic mana, with the activated ability of pay 2 of each colour of mana and sacrifice Door to Nothingness, target player loses the game. There are many alternate win conditions. If you find one you like, build a deck specifically designed to achieve it. Ending. If you've made it this far through the video, then well done. We've covered components of a card, card supertypes, types and subtypes, formats, the phases of a turn, how combat works, keywords, the stack, priority, and more. It is an intimidating amount of information, but now you have a basic grasp of how it all works together. You are much more prepared to sit down with a Magic player and learn, ask questions, and improve. I hope this guide has been helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to leave a comment below or come chat to me live on Twitch. I'm usually streaming a variety of games over at twitch.tv/Josh Strife Hayes. Thank you very much for your time. If this video has been useful at all, then a like would be much appreciated. Have a great day.